Okay, so we're back. Intelligence. Little kid on the internet, so smart. Um, so intelligence is, there are different perspectives on what intelligence is. This is actually a huge debate in psychology. What is intelligence? We've been testing it, we've been measuring it, and we're like not completely agreeing on what it is. One theory of intelligence is that it is a composite of abilities. Like, for example, Binet. Binet was a French researcher who was hired by the French government to develop an examination that could be administered to little kids who were thought to be ready for kindergarten. Um, the French government wanted to get away from kids in school just solely based on age and instead put them into school based on their readiness. So he developed a test that really was assessing the general capacity for comprehension and reasoning. So to find out what the child take the test was ready to comprehend the kinds of materials they would experience in school and do the kind of reasoning things that are required in school. So that was his sole purpose, was to develop a test that was to determine the child's readiness for school. He wasn't making any assertions about differences between kids being innate. He thought that when one child scored higher than another, it solely had to do with experience in the environment. And if a child was chronologically ready for school but wasn't cognitively ready for school, he thought it was just a matter of providing some experiences and some exposure to things to catch the child up. He thought all children had the same basic capacity. Spearman, on the other hand, he thought that there were really two factors to intelligence. There was the G factor, which is your general intellectual capacity, which sounds a lot like Binet's basic definition. Then Spearman added in the S factor, which was assessing specialized intellectual abilities. So Spearman said people can differ on these traits, G factor and S factor, innately. So some of us are just born with more or less of one or the other or both. And so he was one of the first people to really argue for tests being used as a way to sort of determine your innate capacity, determine the differences between people. Intelligence testing has a long history of being associated with some negative things like eugenics. And so for a long time, people didn't really want to talk about intelligence testing because of that kind of thing. Gardner came along, said, I think there are multiple independent intelligences in all of us. And the big difference between us is the degree to which we have these different kinds of intelligences. Now, Gardner's gone a teeny tiny bit crazy in describing all of these different intelligences. And some people have suggested that maybe what he's really describing is like talents, something like that. I'll let you be the judge. Let me present to you all the different intelligences that Gardner thinks or thought we have and see what you think. Okay, so verbal linguistic intelligence. So this is going to be measured by the kinds of questions that you would see on a test that asks you to comprehend something like, in what way are wool and cotton alike? That would be a verbal or a linguistic test question. Okay, then there's logical mathematical, which is just what it sounds like. Can you solve math problems? Can you recognize a series of numbers and figure out what number should come next, or a series of patterns and see which one should come next logically? So far, those two are really the main components of the kinds of tests that either Binet or Spearman would administer. Then we start getting into some things that are a little different, like musical ability or rhythmic ability. So this kind of intelligence, Gardner was measuring a person's ability to produce music, but also to appreciate music, to be able to follow a beat or to carry a tune. So you don't have to be the world's greatest musician, but being able to sort of do the things that are sort of signs of musicality would be higher intelligence than a person who has like no rhythm, can't carry a tune. Bodily kinesthetic gets at kind of intelligence that's required for controlling your body. knowing where your body is in space. So dance ability or sports ability would fall under this category. And good balance would fall under this category. So kids who are little, like between 4 and 6, a lot of times we give them bodily kinesthetic tests to see if they're ready for school, because can you hop on one foot? Can you walk backwards? These kinds of things can be a sign of being behind or having a physical problem. Visuospatial. On the one hand, visuospatial would be your ability to produce art, make things that other people can appreciate or recognize. But the other side of it is being able to orient yourself in space relative to like north, or being able to sort of understand the position of the pieces in chess and know like what would be a legitimate move. Being able to appreciate art. Those a lot of things that are not necessarily like artistic abilities, but are more able to maneuver or understand in a three-dimensional world. All right, now here we start getting into another category. So like intrapersonal is your ability to get along with yourself. That sounds kind of weird, but it's your ability to recognize your own emotions, soothe yourself when you're upset, recognize your own motivations, your own shortcomings, your own talents, right? So understanding yourself. And then interpersonal is your ability to get along with other people. And it's not just, are you popular? That is not even remotely what that's about. It's about being able to recognize other people's body language, recognizing when somebody else is distressed or mad or neutral, being able to support other people and get support from other people. Those kinds of things, being able to get along with the other humans. Naturalist is being able to get along with the environment. So recognizing your position in the environment, recognizing your impact on the environment, recognizing what it means to get out into the environment, what that does to you, to your soul. I don't know if that's the right word, but things like that. That would be under the naturalist intelligence. And existentialist, understanding why you're here. What's the point? Would be the existentialist. And people who have a firmer grasp of the purpose of life would score higher in this area. But I think you can see there's a lot of different things here, and some of them definitely sound more like talents. Some of them sound more like what are classically what you would think of as intelligence. Some of them have been pulled out by other researchers and have suggested that that's a type of what they call emotional intelligence, interpersonal and intrapersonal. So Gardner has been suggesting or arguing that there's not a single monolithic composite of a single ability. Instead, there's a bunch of different things that can make up ability. And one of the things he likes to point to is that there are cases of people who have had brain injuries, who maybe have lost some of their intelligence in one of these areas, and then have experienced an increase in their intelligence in one of the other areas. And he's looked at, for example, people who are autistic savants, where they are really low in interpersonal and intrapersonal intelligence, but really high in logical mathematical or visuospatial or musical rhythmic. And he points out that sometimes if you have a deficit in one area, it allows you to grow in another area. So he thinks these intelligences might be stored in different parts of our brains. Some research evidence that might be supporting this came from the University of British Columbia, where they used a magnetic stimulating device to stimulate areas of the brain that are involved in interpersonal and intrapersonal intelligence, so that those areas of the brain sort of shut down for a little bit. And they found the person suddenly was better at one of the logical, mathematical, musical, rhythmic, or visuospatial. So kind of like allowed another part of them to come forward. We've also seen this in stroke victims, where people have had a stroke in one part of their brain and maybe they've lost interpersonal intelligence. And so suddenly they're like getting really angry at people and storming around and really off-putting, but suddenly now they're got really passionate about art or something. So Gardner's multiple intelligence idea has really, it's caught the attention of the educational system. One idea that educators have had is that if you are naturally strong in one of these areas, sometimes we can use that to get you interested in building in your other areas. So for example, if you're really good at sports, maybe we can use that in your passion to like know the statistics about the sport or the video game that you like to play or whatever. If we could use those numbers in a mathematical equation and start moving you into math, being more interested in the math and building that part. So educators have been really trying to use Gardner's theory to sort of enhance children's experiences. All right. Then we've got Piaget's theory of intelligence. He saw it as a process. As usual, he thinks that we're always seeking, we're always trying to grow and develop. So he thought that intelligence is something that builds on itself. He was much more interested in how we think than what we know. He was not as concerned if you have a 3-year-old who has a large vocabulary, he's a little less impressed with that. You have a 3-year-old with a large vocabulary who can explain what they're thinking about, how their reasoning goes. That he saw as more intelligent. So he wasn't as interested in what a person knows, but in how they think. So he tried to set up intelligence tests that involved giving a problem and then asking the child, how did you go about solving that problem? How do you know that that's the right answer? Those kinds of follow-up questions, trying to get at the process behind what appears to be intelligent behavior. So for Piaget, he did not agree with Spearman that intelligence was innate. He thought it was a combination of environment, maybe some part being your natural intelligence, and then the third part being the child interacting with the environment. So you've got environment influencing intelligence, intelligence influencing how the child is interacting with the environment, and then we start entering into a circle where behavior builds on behavior, feedback from the environment gives us feedback about the accuracy of our behavior, and so on. So intelligence is thought at Piaget is something that you cycle through and grow and develop and build on. It's not just an entity that you're born with. So he called it the dynamic interplay between the child, the environment, and intellect. All right. Information processing. This is going to come from more cognitive, just straight cognitive theorists. And they say that intelligence is really going to be measured by assessing the strategies that the person uses for thinking. So if intelligence is really your cognitive strategies, we can teach you different cognitive strategies. Some of you may have heard of Common Core math program where they try and explain what is a pretty convoluted strategy for how to add certain numbers. Like I heard one teacher explain that 9 is your friend, and it somehow, I lost track of what she was trying to explain, but the thing is, the premise seems to be built on this information processing idea that if there are efficient ways of solving problems, we should be able to train children to use those efficient strategies. I think the reason why I lost track on 9 is your friend explanation is that it didn't seem like an efficient strategy. It takes, 150 words to explain how 9 gets added to 6. You've probably not made a simple cognitive strategy. You've probably made a complex one. So simple strategies that will make a person more efficient can be trained according to this model. And if they are trained with these efficient strategies, they will appear more intelligent out in the world because they'll be able to apply those strategies quickly and on the fly to solve problems. So information processing takes the perspective that you have to figure out what the strategies are and then teach those rather than going after concepts and letting children figure out their own cognitive strategies. So I have a problem for you. If you have black, brown socks in a drawer, and there's only black and brown, and they're mixed in a ratio of 4 to 5. So there's 4 black socks for every 5 brown socks in the drawer. How many must you pull out to ensure 2 of the same color? So you've got black and brown socks in a drawer. there are more brown socks than black socks. How many must you pull out to ensure two of the same color? So this is the kind of strategy that can be trained, because we can focus a child's attention in on eliminating maybe some extraneous information that isn't really relevant. Like, for example, does ratio really matter? Let's see. If I pull out if I pull out 3 socks, I will always get 2 the same color. It doesn't matter what the ratio is. Sometimes I'll get 3 of the same color. But I will always get 2 of the same color, because the only possible combinations that are in that drawer, if I pull 3 socks at a time, will be 2 of one color at the minimum, and sometimes 3 of one color. So how many must I pull out to ensure 2 of the same color? Ratio doesn't matter. So if we can focus the learner in on the parts that do matter and train them to ignore the stuff that doesn't matter, suddenly problems become a lot simpler and intelligent behavior becomes more likely. So we teach the strategies, what to focus on. If you're still wondering what the heck this sock demonstration was, you can come back and think about it later. Now, one of the big basic arguments about intelligence has been, is it inborn, like Spearman argued, or is it nurtured, like Binet argued, or like the information processing theory argued? Gardner seems to be arguing for a nature side with multiple intelligences, but he also argues that there must be some kind of environmental impact, because it can change which of your areas are the most important. So we have this basic nature and nurture controversy. Now, based on research, and your textbook goes into some of the research, basically we've fallen down on the side of about percent of intelligence is likely due to genes. Through research on twins, from research on adopted children who are raised in the exact same household with the same environment, we've been able to sort out the role of shared genes from the role of shared environment, or unshared environment too, and come to the conclusion that probably about 80% of our intelligence is due to genes. Now that leaves about 20% to nurture. So let's look at this little chart. And first I'm going to focus you in on my nature argument. So if we compare, so what you're seeing on the left side, on the y-axis, is the correlation between the twins' IQ scores. So if they have the exact same score, their correlation coefficient would be 1.00, right? So if we go over to the x-axis, we see that on the left we have identical twins who are reared together. So those are identical twins who are raised in the same household. The next column, we have identical twins who are reared apart. Those are twins who are adopted at birth and raised in separate households. The next column is fraternal twins reared together and siblings reared together. So fraternal twins were in the womb at the same time, but only share 50% of their genes, as you recall. Regular siblings did not share the womb at the same time. They still share 50% of their genes in common. So fraternal twins and siblings are the same amount of genes in common with different environments. The 2 columns of identical twins, same amount of genes in common, but different environments, right? So on the left, they were reared separately. On the left, they were reared together, and in the right-hand column, they were reared apart. And then on the final column, we have people who were adopted in the same household and reared together, but they aren't related to each other. All right, so my little box is pointing at that middle bar, the fraternal twins reared together, and it says lower correlation than identical twins shows genetic effects. Right, so when we see that whether the identical twins were reared together or the identical twins were reared apart, their IQ scores are more similar to each other than the fraternal twins' IQ scores. So that makes a little bit of an argument on the nature side, right? Because it shows that genes are more important than environment. On the nurture side, we're going to point out that, yeah, clearly there's a strong genetic component, but your genes interact, co-vary with your environment. So when we talk about the remaining 20%, we're talking about the role of environment. So here in this column, we see lower correlation, identical twins reared together shows some environmental effect. If we go over 2 columns to the right and look at the siblings reared together, we'll see the siblings that are reared together did not share the womb at the same time. They are not the same age as each other like fraternal twins are. And that difference in their environments is what's accounting for the lower correlation between the 2 siblings' IQ scores than what we see among the fraternal twins. So basically what I look at on this chart is that, okay, so we're starting from genes being the more powerful component. But if we change how much the environment overlaps, we take a stair step down. We lose about 10% of the covariance. Take another stair step down if we vary how much genes we have in common. Take another stair step down if we change how much environment we have in common. And then in the final column, we take another stair step down when we change how much genes we have in common. So we see the impact of both genes and environment, but nature seems to be the more powerful influence. You are born with a disposition to a particular intelligence level. Next. Childhood memories. Most of us experience what's called childhood amnesia for the first up to maybe 4 years of age. We will literally not remember anything independent of having been shown a picture a bunch of times or having heard the story a bunch of times. We literally cannot independently remember it. Freud said that it's because so many horrifying things happened to us during that birth to 4 years of age. You know, we got born, we got weaned, we got potty trained, maybe a sibling was born. It was all so traumatic, we just couldn't bear it. So we just repressed it all. But we don't really think that's true anymore. A lot of us have really a difficult time remembering as long as like age 9. We have difficulty really specifically remembering very much. Like we have fits and starts, maybe we remember who our teacher was, or we remember that one thing we did. We just really don't have very continuous memories prior to age 9. And it's not necessarily the case that it's because you repressed something like Freud thought. We probably didn't repress it like Freud thought. Instead, Piaget said, you know what? When we encoded those memories, we thought like children. We don't think like children anymore. So it's hard to find those memories. His explanation is a lot like you stored the memories in Word 1998, and you're trying to retrieve it in Word 2018. They're not compatible anymore. So since you don't think like a child anymore, it's hard to generate the memories. Information processing basically agrees and says, you know what, you've stored information in the wrong format. Many of our memories from birth to 4 are very non-verbal. You know, even if you were talking at the time, you don't necessarily have this nice little index of memories stored by label like you do as an adult. Instead, you might have sort of just these generic feelings, or maybe a smell will evoke like imprecise memory, but powerful feeling one that's maybe some people have described it as eerie, because you get this feeling, but you can't, it feels like a memory, but you can't figure it out. And it might be that a lot of those very early childhood memories are actually stored in our limbic system in the hippocampus rather than up in our cortex where we keep our adult memories. So it could be that we just got the wrong format. We can't find it. It's not retrievable for us. Kids tend to be aware that their memories aren't that good. And so a lot of times they will deliberately do things to help them remember things. That awareness about how their memories work is called MetaMemory. So meta refers to, awareness. So awareness about how memory works. Kindergartners understand the memory process. They realize that they forget a lot of things. And so they might do external cues like tying a string on their finger to remind themselves, or tell their parent the second they see them, okay, I need to remember something, they just unload it the minute they see their parent. So it shows that they're aware that forgetting occurs. They're aware that if they practice something, it'll aid their memory. We have a couple of kids playing concentration, if you ever played that with your kid, where you take 2 of each card, scramble them up, put them face down, and try and match up the pairs. Practicing memory improves memory. Kids know that. They also realize that it's harder to remember a lot of things than it is to remember a couple of things. So a lot of times they'll try and break up what they're trying to remember, or they'll see a long list and they'll say, I'm never going to be able to remember all of that. So it shows that they're aware of how memory works. And then, like I said, they oftentimes use records or cues or other people to try and help them to remember things. Back in the glorious olden days when I was a child, my best friend when I was 4, she lived on the corner, and it seemed like so far to walk. But of course, as an adult, I went back to the neighborhood, and she literally lived 3 doors down on a sidewalk, completely safe, little neighborhood. And so my mom would she probably stood on the front porch. And when I get to my friend's house, her mom was always on the front porch when I got there. So I'm guessing I was watched the whole time. But as a kid, of course, I didn't feel like I was being watched. But my mom would say to me, okay, you can go over to your friend's house, be home by 2 o'clock. And don't come home on time, then I'm not going to let you go over there by yourself anymore. So I remember walking down the street, like with every step going 2 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 2 o'clock. And then as soon as I'd get there, I'd say to my friend's mom, I got to be home at 2 o'clock. And then I would just, forget everything. And then she would tell me when it was time to go home because I was 4 and couldn't remember anything. But that's what kids do. They're aware that their memories aren't that good, so they use these other cues. Categorizing can be one of those ways that kids can try to improve their memories, to remember more things. They've actually done experiments where they've tried to teach lists of words to kids. It's all done orally. The kids don't have to write anything down or anything. They try and teach them a list of words. What they've noticed is that with age, kids display better and better strategies for remembering things. So like at age 2, they tend to focus in on the words that rhyme. So they'll kind of forget words that don't rhyme and on the list and only remember the ones that rhyme with each other. By age 3, they start to focus in on syntactical relationships. Like they'll remember that men go with work. Sexist. But they'll tend to remember those kinds of associations based on the syntax. By age 4, they'll start to cluster by category. So they'll put the fruits together in their memory, and they'll just unload all the fruits at one time. And then maybe not be able to remember anything else once they got through the one category that they started with. And then by age 5, they start to really become sort of rigid in their belief that they have to reproduce the list in the order it's presented. And if they have remembered like the first and second thing on the list, can't remember the third thing, they absolutely will not move on. That's it. I guess I only remember 2 things. I can't remember the third one. Now my mind's gone blank. They've just lost the whole thing. So you can kind of see them changing their strategy when you use lists and ask them to just reproduce the items on the list. So they do get more sophisticated. By age 5, maybe a little stubborn in their sophistication. But anyway, all right. By age 2, as young as age 2, they start to rely on categories, and by 4 to 6, they are categorizing way more than a 2-year-old. But this will continue to improve across childhood. In my research as a doctoral candidate, I did research on 6th graders versus adults. And the 6th graders did not categorize as much as the adults did. So it's something that continues to grow. But and it's like incremental. As we age, we see more of it, that's for sure. The 2-year-olds are starting to put stuff together, make things a little bit simpler to hold their memories. All right, well, that concludes cognition. I will see you guys in biosocial development, early childhood.